Hi, my name is Adam Kroll and I'm a safety consultant working with Rangelands. In this video I'm going to show you how you can drastically reduce the risks associated at your workplace in an easy and effective way. This video has been produced for Rangelands employees, delivery organisations, contractors and subcontractors. Rangelands needs to ensure that every person working under Rangelands doesn't expose themselves and others to an unacceptable potential for harm. Firstly, working remotely is extremely dangerous. Say one day you're out driving and your car stops and for whatever reason the satellite phone's not working and you haven't set up a time that you're going to meet the next person who, if you're late, can activate a search and rescue procedure. You could be stuck out there for days and it could, in the worst case scenario, lead to a fatality. Another benefit in following these procedures is that the documentation allows you to effectively plan the job. So say you were going to do some fencing, there was an area that you hadn't thought of that had overgrown and you couldn't get access to that area, so you needed a chainsaw. If you hadn't done this procedure, you may not have effectively planned for that, and so you'd waste 2 hours of your time driving back to the station, getting the equipment, driving back out to your work site. So you would have saved all that time and fuel. Another benefit is that you'll be complying with the Occupational Health and Safety Act of 1984. So if an incident does occur and you haven't completed the documentation, you may be deemed negligent and you may face prosecution. Future clients will also require you to do this documentation as well. So by learning this procedure now, you're saving time in the future and it'll be a good investment for your business. A job safety analysis, or JSA, is a document that allows us to list all of the risks present in our workplace, rank those risks, and then determine the most effective way to mitigate those risks. So when you're writing the JSA, everybody needs to be involved in the process. So you start off with the people who are putting themselves at risk and understand those risks and how to mitigate those risks, and then you include the people who may have smaller jobs within that overarching job, and then lastly the managers. So the benefits of doing this are that the younger generation can learn from the more experienced people because they've experienced more risk and how to mitigate those risks. But then the more experienced people can also learn from the less experienced people because they may have had different training, had different background experiences. So everyone combining can produce the best possible JSA. The other benefits are that 2 heads are better than 1 and it saves you time writing multiple JSAs. Your project manager would have sent you this form and this is the JSA. So the first section that we need to fill out is job details, and the first part of that is self-explanatory. The second part here is emergency response plan. So you might have your own emergency response plan. If you do, that's great, use that one instead of Rangelands. If you don't have an emergency response plan, it's fine to use Rangelands. So to access Rangelands, we need to jump onto online compliance, or online WHS as it's called, and you should have received this form from your project manager, and that's got the website address and the username and password. So if we jump onto that website, you can see the web address here is onlinewhs.whssystems.com.au. I've got a fake username and password there. We'll click login, and you can see tab right at the top, emergency procedures register, and in here we have our medical emergency and remote emergency and site emergency. So you need to download all 3 of those documents, read them. It's really important that you read them because you'll have a clear idea of exactly what to do if an emergency occurs. Because when an emergency occurs, time is imperative and it's going to be too late to go back and read those documents once an emergency has occurred. You also need to print out those documents and take them to the job site with you. So you obviously can't remember everything in there, so you'll need to have that on hand. The next step is putting in a search and rescue contact person, so a person who's going to be responsible for checking the team members' return from the job on time. And then you need to tick yes or no for all of these items here. If you do tick no for any of those items, you'll need to address how you're going to mitigate the risks associated with that. Well, the best thing first off is to actually conduct the training, such as first aid qualifications, or buy a personal locator beacon. If you can't do that, then you need to mitigate the risks effectively. The bottom section here is really important. So it's working out where the closest medical centre is, where the closest airstrip is in case of an emergency, how you're going to get to the hospital. You need to work all of that out before you go out to site. It's really important that you do that, because when you get out to site, an emergency happens, you might panic. If you've already worked out exactly where you're going to go and exactly what you're going to do when an emergency occurs, a lot of time will be saved, you won't get into so much of a panic, and you'll have a successful outcome. Okay, so let's go on to the next section, doing a risk assessment.
A pre-filled one here. Okay, so say the job is fencing. The first job step would be to pack up the equipment for the job. What are the hazards associated with packing a vehicle? So it's lifting heavy objects, and some of the objects may be sharp. So I'll put them both into their own rows. Now, what's the impact of the hazard? The impact of lifting heavy objects is back strain, or if you drop one, it's crushing. So, landing on your foot, crushing your foot, and for sharp objects, it's cuts. Now we rate the risk of heavy objects. So to do that, we scroll back up to the previous page. To the risk matrix page. And what we need to do is we need to look at the likelihood of it occurring and the consequence if it does occur. So say we need to take a generator. What's the possibility that we could have back strain from lifting a heavy generator? It's definitely possible that it could occur. And what's the consequence if we do our back in, lifting the generator? It's probably moderate. You could have more than 10 days lost time injuries. And therefore the rating that we'll put in there is a 9. So scroll back down and we put a 9 in that column. Okay, so what risk controls can we put in to decrease both the likelihood and consequence of us straining our back, or dropping the unit on our toes? So if we go up to the hierarchy of controls, which is the previous page, the hierarchy of controls list the methods for control with the most effective starting up top. So the most effective way to eliminate or to reduce the consequence and likelihood that we're going to have back strain is to eliminate the need to lift that object. How can we eliminate the need? Well, it's use a forklift. So if we use a forklift, we're not using our back at all. We've eliminated the chance that we're going to create back strain, and therefore there's no chance of that happening. So that's the most effective method. Now, say you don't have a forklift on site, what else can we do? So then we look down to the second substitute. Do we need such a large generator? Can we substitute it for a smaller generator? So we'll put there, use a smaller generator. Now, we don't have to stop at use a small generator. We keep looking down the list and trying to think of more ways that we can reduce the likelihood and consequence of back strain occurring. Can we isolate? Isolate means to remove. We can't really remove us from moving the generator. Isolate would be applicable, say, if you were doing some grinding or welding, you would move yourself away from where others were working. Are there any engineering controls we can put in place? We can use a trolley to carry from the bench to the ute. So that's an engineering control we can put in place. And let's keep going down the list. Administration. Are there any administrative procedures we can put in place? So we can use correct manual lifting techniques. So we can watch a video on using correct manual lifting techniques to reduce it. And part of that would be to do a 2-man lift instead of a 1-man lift if it's too heavy. And then the least effective control is PPE, which is right down the bottom there. So the PPE that we could use for that is a back brace. So now with all of those risk control methods in place, we go back to our risk matrix, and with all of those things in place, what's the likelihood that we're going to do our back in? It would be pretty rare, especially if we were using a forklift. And so say we don't have a forklift and we're using a smaller generator, we've got a trolley, we've got 2 people to move it, and we've got the PPE, and we've watched correct manual handling techniques. It would be rare that we're going to do our back in, and if we did, it would be from twisting, not actually lifting. So lost time injury would be less than 10 days. So now the risk is too low. If after putting in your control measures, your level of risk is still high or very high, this is unacceptable. You need to have another look at what you can implement, how you can reduce both the likelihood and consequence of the incident occurring to bring it down to a moderate level. If you can't think of anything, you're going to need to ask management, ask co-workers, ask people who may have more experience in the job, and lastly you can ask myself through your project manager. And then the last step is to put the person who is responsible for implementing those actions. So say someone who's going to get the smaller generator or get the trolley or get the video and correct manual handling techniques.
To make life easier, we've created Safe Work Methods, or SWM for short. SWM is a pre-filled JSA where the risks for that job don't change from job to job. So as an example, in your JSA you may have written driving as the first step, so driving out to site. You can download the SWM for driving, read through it. If you agree with what it says and you agree with the control measures, then in the risk control column of your JSA you would put in refer to driving SWM. You then need to print out the SWM and keep it with your JSA when you go out to site. You can also use multiple SWMs in the one JSA. If you've completed a JSA and you believe that it would be useful as an SWM, please let your project manager know and they'll upload it and review it. And then in the future, some of the risks and the control measures that you've thought of can be used by other people and then improve the safety at their site. So now have a look through the SWMs that are available on online compliance, and then pause the video and complete the rest of section 2 of your JSA.
Once you've completed with section 2, we go on to section 3. This is a checklist for all of the PPE and other safety equipment that you're going to need, and it's great to look at before you go out to your job site so that you don't forget anything, you don't waste any time. So go through this list, check that you've got the MSDS that you need, PPE, anything else, any permits that you need before heading out to site. Then once we've done that, we go and we have the manager sign the approval, and we also have the JSA team members sign off too. It's important that everybody who's conducting the work signs off on it, and if there's somebody who comes into the job halfway through, you must ensure that they've read the document and they sign the document, and also that they add to the document as well and put in their own mitigating measures.
If risks change during the job, you'll need to amend the JSA to include those risks. Say for example you're working in the Kimberley and the job goes for longer than you expected and you start coming into cyclone season. You'll need to enter that into the JSA just at the end of the document. Another example is if you change location and you move to a different site, obviously the risks there are going to be different to the previous site. Also, you may arrive on site and then see risks that you hadn't thought of before, or as you're doing the job, you notice a risk that you hadn't thought of, it's not too late to amend the JSA. And then once you've made the changes, you simply write your name again and put the date when you make the changes and sign it again. And that'll show that you're being proactive towards safety. Reporting hazards is really important. Reporting incidences and hazards will allow us to mitigate the risks, ensuring that you won't be injured. Acting on risks and mitigating them is the core to an effective safety management system. And the only people who can make that system effective is the people out on the ground exposed to the risks, yourself.
To report a hazard, we go back to the online compliance website and we click on Hazard Register. Then we click Add Hazard. And then you simply fill in all of the details that come up. It's quite self-explanatory. In the next step, it will ask you to do something similar to how you filled your JSA out, going through the hierarchy of controls, putting in control methods. So I won't explain that again. Now, if an incident occurs, before completing the form, we need to collect as much information as we can to help determine the root cause of the incident. This will allow us to put in place the most effective control measures to ensure that the incident never happens again. In collecting data, take photos, statements of witnesses, and think about the events leading up to the incident, and then complete the form. So we go back to site icons, and then we go to incident form. And once again, this is quite self-explanatory. So simply put in all of the information, and then that document will then go to your manager as well as the Rangelands project manager so that they can act upon it. The last step is to take a look at the Rangelands policy. So we go back to online compliance and we click on Policy Register. And then to open that document, you simply click on the PDF icon there. And from reading that, what you'll notice is that Rangelands are extremely committed to ensuring that all employees, contractors and organisations working for Rangelands complete the work safely. It also has their employee responsibilities, which any DO, contractor, subcontractor and employee will need to read and carry out.
Now you should have a clear understanding of what's required, and I hope you've introduced a lot of ways to make your work safer. If you require further clarification, please see your project manager. Thank you.